So Malcolm, the University of Toronto has quite a legacy of track and field. Back in the late 60s, Kidd, Crothers and Bailey raced on the track at varsity, and in about 2 months' time, Usain Bolt and some of the best in the world will be coming back to varsity for a world-class track meet. And we're just trying to figure out what this might mean for the city of Toronto and kind of the potential it could have for track in North America. And wanted to get a bit of a sense from what you felt as a student at Toronto, how Varsity Centre itself played into your life. And
well, I only ran. I actually ran competitively only 1 year at University of Toronto. I had terrible injury problems through college, but I did think at the time, and still think that Toronto is the as a city place to go running is fantastic. I still remember all the runs I used to do. I used to do them late at night. Like I used to go at 3 a.m. with this guy named Paul Reed, and we would go up. We would do like this 10 or 11 mile run, and it was lovely. And this was during the winter mostly, so the streets would be, sometimes there'd be a little bit of snow on the ground. The streets would be absolutely empty. We would go up all the way into Mount Pleasant, and across that. What's that old railway bed that runs right just north of Eglinton? We go over to the Allen Expressway and then down through. But so most of my running memories of Toronto are of the city, not the university so much. But I do remember going to. I guess we worked out in the. I've forgotten what it's called, the athletic center, and doing the most exhausting workouts of my life, which I still remember as well. My friends used to refer to as my varsity track practice look. Because I would come back to the dining hall afterwards and I just would be completely shot.
Your start in running, where did that come from?
I started running. Well, I'd always been. My dad was a runner, and also my mom had a cousin who represented Jamaica at the Commonwealth Games, but in the 10K. So not in the Jamaican glamorous thing, but the Jamaican non-glamorous thing. So they was running all around. And then there was a little older, my high school had won OFSA cross country just a few years before I started, 2 years before I started. So there was a very strong running tradition there. Right. And so I fell in almost immediately with that group of cross country runners who were still sort of hanging around.
Would that have included Tom Lobsinger?
No, so Tom Lobsinger was not. He was at in Kitchener. He was at St. Jerome's.
Okay.
But then I joined KW Track where he was. So he was a couple years older than me. But that was the era of Tom Lobsinger and also what's his name? There's a great 10K runner, Paul Roberts.
Yes.
And Gary Crosley and all this. He was from Elmira. So there was a whole group of really good runners that Brent McFarlane was my coach at KW Track.
Yes. Now the value in terms of mentors and having, say, talented and hardworking youth a year or two ahead of you, in any, I think, event, whether it's literature or whether it's sport, that often drives excellence. And did you find that with?
Oh yeah. So when I was in grade 9, these two of the guys who had been on this OFSA winning cross country team, who were in college at University at Waterloo, but still living in Elmira, would invite me to go running with them. So they were 19 or 20, and I was 13. And I would go for these. They would go longer, but I would go for about 5 miles with them. And you had to run off with that to this 13-year-old to keep up with a 20-year-old. Particularly, they were good too. So that was my first kind of. I jumped in, being kind of pushed by two very good, very strong runners, and made all the difference in the world, I think. It's just a kind of just being aware that it was this idea of you could see someone who was running, I don't know what they were running, sub-6 pace, for them a very easy pace, but this notion that you could run with someone for whom running at that speed was easy. It just tells you, oh, it's possible. It's this whole. I always think back to the when Bannister breaks the 4-minute mile, then everybody does right after that, right? There's a whole rush of them who suddenly all break it, and you just realize these barriers, these self-created barriers exist, and there's nothing physical about it. It's just purely psychological. Anyway, so I had this kind of, I knew from the minute I started running that running really fast was something that people could do, right? Because I would go running with these guys.
When I run, I often search for, maybe not consciously, but subconsciously, cadence and rhythm. Mm-hmm. And as a writer, do you ever, are there similar parallels between cadence, rhythm, and just kind of getting into the groove?
I think so. I saw this interview with Elvis Costello for that show Spectacle, which is actually filmed in Toronto. He was interviewing Bill Clinton, and he was of course who was actually a very good saxophonist as a kid. And he asked him about, did he think that playing the sax, knowing the sax, had something to do with his skills as an orator? And he had a really, he said, absolutely, it's the same thing. And I wonder about it in running. And you're right, there is a kind of, you do, as a serious runner, become obsessed with this question of running. Well, you say, I would say running gracefully. Running is at its best is this kind of graceful, elegant act, right? And it's an aesthetic exercise. It's moving your body beautifully through space, right? And writing at its best is a purely aesthetic exercise. It's how to get as simply and cleanly and elegantly as possible through a sentence. So it introduces a habit of mind, which becomes enormously useful in other domains.
Thanks. This has been a treat. We're here in New York City with Malcolm Gladwell.
Well, you're not going to ask me about when I beat Dave Reed. I came all the way down here. I'm waiting for this question.
Okay. So, Malcolm, we have to speak a little bit about Dave Reed and how he plays into your life, your ability to continue running, and
Dave Reed, the greatest miler of my generation, right?
Absolutely.
Has never beaten me over 1,500 meters. As a 13-year-old at the Legion Championships, when I set the Ontario record or the Canadian record, and then the next year at OFSA, and then one other time later on in the OFSA year. And then I never raced. I never actually ran 1,500 meters against him again. That's why I remain undefeated. But nonetheless, I am the only Canadian of my generation, middle distance runner of my generation, who can truthfully say that he was never beaten by Dave Reed over 1,500 meters. I do cling to this very, very obscure achievement that I'm the only member of that generation to be undefeated against the master. Also, by the way, the next great 1,500 meter runner, also from Cambridge, 2 years after Dave Reed was
Doug Consiglio.
I'm also undefeated against Doug Consiglio. Now, mind you, I never raced him when he was good either, but I got all the good ones early, so I'm very proud of that fact.
And my daughter's at the same high school, or was at the same high school as Doug Consiglio, so Southwood Secondary School.
I didn't realize you were from Cambridge.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. All right, I just had to get that in.
That's great.